just to finally, this little thing about pure lime. This is a lime producer in Vermont in the USA in the 19th century, I think, but he's advertising the fact that his lime is 99.5% pure. Why would he do that if it's not what the masons wanted to use, you know? And where I worked and do occasionally in British Columbia, Vancouver Island, the local lime, which was scarce, but they found it all out, was 96% pure, which is a fat lime. You know, the definition of a fat lime typically, historically, is up to 6% clay. It's still called a fat lime. It works the same and all that. And the main benefit of having a maybe 5% pozzolan, either naturally or added in, is that it reduces initial shrinkage. The mortar won't be stronger in the long run for having that there. It's a craft thing to reduce initial shrinkage, because we all find that irritating. Obviously we do. You know, that's what that's about. But after about 10, 20 years of use of that lime, the 96% pure in British Columbia, in Vancouver Island, I should say, they switched to the San Juan Islands over in the US, which is 99% pure. So they're switching from a less pure to a more pure lime. Why would they do that if it's not what they wanted? Maybe this isn't such a hard argument in this country, but it's a bloody hard argument in Britain, because there's this narrative that masons always wanted impure limes, they wanted hydraulic, and it's not true. The evidence simply does not support that. It says the opposite. So that, and just this one here where, you know, fat limes are preferred and so on, and then down here, Searle, hydraulic limes behave like a mixture of fat lime and Portland cement, except without the predictability and reliability of that mixture of Portland cement and sand. But in chemical composition, they are very, very similar. Okay. And just to give a specification, the Canadian Parliament building, I know that, don't get me wrong here, John Ashurst was a wonderful man, yeah, and he made a massive contribution to everything we're doing. But he specified the addition of latex at the Parliament building back in the day, and that is probably the wettest fabric I've ever seen in my life, yeah? And there are lots of lime premix producers now advocating the addition of latex to the mortars. Don't do it, right? And so, but look at this spec. The mortar to be used as hot as possible, and no more mortar to be mixed in one day than can be used on the same. Now when you see that, which is, you often just see that bit, no more to be mixed in that day than can be used that day. This is this idea that was common, that the lime mortar is best when it's used the freshest possibly after making. And the longer you lay it down for, as with lime putty, the weaker it might become. Now they might be wrong about that, but that was a firm, solid belief for 2,000 years. Use it as fresh as you can. And you might interpret that as meaning it's hydraulic, but no, when they did use hydraulic limes, they're very clear. As soon as that starts to stiffen, throw it away, because the hydraulic set has started. And if you knock it up, you remove it. And if you knock it up again, as St. Astier told you to do over a 36-hour period, you might end up with you've knocked out all the a significant proportion of the hydraulicity is gone. So anyway, that's the Canadian Parliament building. They've just spent $2 billion repointing the west wing of this complex with a hydraulic lime that has 3% free lime in it. So they've wasted, in my opinion. They will be back on that building in 20 years' time. Okay, so earth mortars, we're going to scoot through this, but this is the historic. At last, finally, the conservation world in Britain is taking earth and earth lime mortars absolutely seriously. We have spent 40 years ignoring their existence. Believe me. So quickly then, as we go through, the so-called oldest house in France, probably debatable, highly debatable, but that's a beautiful picture. You'll see it posted a lot on Facebook. Earth lime built, masonry, earth lime plasters, and it would of course have had a lime finish over it, a pure lime or very pure lime finish. This is one of our local churches, a former priory church, much reduced from what it was. One of the most beautiful buildings in Britain, in my opinion, because it's been unmolested by later change. Early English masonry style, unmolested since it was done. But this church, as every church I know in Britain, built with earth lime mortars, you know, in the French tradition, obviously.
What happened to the left side?
It burned, actually, that burned. They took off a whole story here, and that's a 15th century window that was put. And in most cases, lime washed at the least. Lime wash giving you a fully capillary active surface. That's the thing. You're not relying just on the joints to manage that moisture that's received. You've got a whole surface that's 100% surface area, capillary active to the optimal level, and incredibly durable. Lime washes will last if we make them right. You do not, and they did not make lime wash from lime putty diluted. That is rubbish. It's a crap material. You can't put it on any thickness. You make it from quicklime and you apply it hot. I've never seen more than 3 coats of lime wash specified historically. None of this 7 water thin coats nonsense. So, okay, I'll move on through there just to, and just a few shots of the inside of we missed this house. So high status building. And from my perspective, for me, this is where this journey started. I've been using a weak hydraulic lime because I didn't know what the alternative was until we worked on this building, and I was confronted by earth lime mortars, things and all of this. So, and I wanted clearly to use mortars that were compatible with that fabric. It's important to say the capillarity of a typical earth lime mortar is the same as the capillarity, more or less, of a lime-rich mortar. So that's the compatibility we were talking about. If that pointing mortar is less capillary active, that's a problem for the mortars inside that wall. Yeah. So it's an early gentry house. Just to emphasise its status, this is not. It's a common belief in the UK that they used mud because they didn't have any money. No, they used it because the masons chose it and it was the optimal material. Because quickly go back to that. Up there is Castle Howard. I mean, that's the Palais. You might have heard of it. If you watch Bridgerton on the telly, they're filming it there at the moment, but on Netflix. But not that I want to advertise Netflix, but it's a grand palace built with earth lime mortars because the mason chose the mortars, not Hawksmoor and Vanbrugh, the very celebrated Romanesque architects in Britain. They didn't have any, that wasn't their business. The mortars were the business of the master mason. And that is a situation that was the common situation in Britain till about 1870, 1880. And that's the context of Henry Scott saying, craftsmen know nothing. I know best. I'm an engineer. That's when the change happened, when that specification of the mortars was taken from the crafts by the professionals. I don't want to say any more than that. For whatever reason, after that, things started to change for the worst, yeah? In terms of mortars, that's what I'm talking about. So quickly just jump on again. So in York House, we have the whole panoply. Here's an earth lime backing coat with hay to resist the shrinkage. Very lime rich. On analysis, these are about 90% pure lime, 10% limestone dust. Why 10%? Well, we need to find out why, I suppose, is all I can say. But 10%. And the rest is hair, ox hair, cow hair, typically. This one, and this is the fabric of that building I just showed you. Limestone laid in mud, earth lime mortars, dubbed out, plastered in earth. That's an earth lime plaster, but with the staining from the lime finish coat that's come off. That's why it looks white. And then as they transitioned away from earth lime into lime sand, often there's still clay in there to some extent, and we have evidence that they deliberately added clay, which is contrary to what everyone might expect, but hugely lime rich. And yeah, in terms of plastering, if we're using very lime rich plasters, we need to have a lot of hair in there to resist that shrinkage. But that's quite a structural ingredient in terms of flexural strength and all these things. So, and this is just an example of us working in, and this was actually Nagto, a student from Bhutan, an architect from Bhutan. I learned a lot from her about earth building because of course Bhutan that's what it is. And so on. So this is reinstatement where it had been compromised by later materials that were stopping it from breathing, yeah? And that's just a brief analysis of a typical earth lime plaster from Molten. 1 quicklime, 3.1 clay-bearing subsoil. So that's actually quite lime-rich. As Bill said, the analyst, that is the only 1 lime to 3 mortar he has ever analysed in his life, because lime sand mortars are never that lean.
3.1.
Well, yeah. Well, he's very accurate, Bill. And whoever said that's pedantic, yeah, but essentially 1 to 3. It's more often no more than 10% or 20% lime. And in Spain, most of the round earth structures that Valencia University have analysed, most of the round earth structures in Spain have 10 or 20% lime addition. Who knew? But that's the case. And it's because when you add a little bit of lime to an earth, it transforms that material into something completely different, far more workable, and all these things. That's just some data. But a lot of these, I just like, you're going to get this slideshow so you can read them. These are building accounts, typically. And we only find earth lime mortars in building accounts, not experts. They didn't write about them, except the French, they did. But so you can see the ingredients of an earth lime mortar being delivered to site there, and so on. Spain, Valencia, just to give you an overview here, earth lime bedding mortars very much in Roman tradition, hot mixed lime pointing mortars over the top. Valencia in Spain. That's a 17th century merchant's house in the old city in Valencia. This near us in York, near York, this is the system we're talking about. Earth lime bedding mortars struck almost at the face, laid over with a little layer of lime. They're not hacking it back that deep. It's laid on like a localized plaster, and that one is just pure lime and hair, nothing else, just lime and hair. But it's not hot mixed in the sense that we are talking about, but it's essential that you slate lime putty in the right way to get the right material, and we don't do that today. I am in no doubt we do not slate lime putty properly. And then Calvados in Normandy, but all of these mortars could be in my village. They're in Normandy, but they could also be they're exactly the same. And looking at a universal material here, all around the world. Asturias, northwest Spain, the same. Earth lime bedding mortars, sometimes just clay. I mean, if the clay was enough, they wouldn't add the lime, didn't feel the need for it. But then dubbed out with a hot lime, dubbing out, plastered with the hot lime, and then finished with a hot lime wash. Made from quick lime, applied when it's still hot. Very different material to what we think lime wash is. Yeah. And on timber frames in Britain, everywhere, the same system, except within the panels. And in China, on the Great Wall, they've in recent years realised, well, maybe it wasn't such a good idea to use cement, even though we produce more cement than anywhere in the world in history. We're not going to use it on the Great Wall of China. We're going to use quicklime mortars and earth lime mortars. And the traditional earth lime mix in China for most buildings, including the Forbidden Palace buildings, is 70% loam, 70% clay-bearing subsoil, 30% slate lime. That's the traditional mix in China, and it's topped over with a very pure lime, very rich, if not entirely lime pointing. So it's the same system in China as it is in Normandy, as it is in everywhere. This is what I'm trying to get across. And this, just to counter the Saint Astier argument that all they ever used in France was NHL, particularly theirs, of course, is that I would say that's a 20th century building built with earth lime infill panels and the same lime system over the top. I might be wrong on the date of it, but my feeling is it's that. And then, is this a structural material? This tower has been just in Lincolnshire, in Britain, 1,000 years. And that is, any mason I think would agree with me, that's a very plumb structure. Plumb by meaning it's straight. And the lime bedding, pointing mortars fell away for the most. They're still there in places, but they fell away long ago, and that has proved a remarkably durable material in the weather, in the British weather, earth lime. So they don't need the lime really. They didn't know that. They didn't say that. The lime is to drive that capillary extraction, I would say, because it's the more capillary active material compared to that. So, and then repairs. This is our local church, Anglo-Scandinavian church. So and we're deep filling with earth lime, which is what it was built with, and then pointing with hot mix lime over the top of that. And then this one, just put this in for, there is some difference in use, not in performance in my opinion, between modern quicklime and traditionally burned. And I burn in my little kiln, not for everything I do, I wish I could, I wish that could make sense. I haven't got the time as most of it. So during the first lockdown, I burned some local limestone, I slaked it to a hydrate and immediately mixed in hair, nothing else, no sand, pointed the wall, so that's just after pointing. And then this is within a week or two, it's carbonated on the face, not at the depth, at the face. And that's an entirely durable mortar, and there's nothing there but lime and hair, okay? And the only aggregate is the little bits of grit around which the ooids formed on the seabed. You know, that's the core that they rolling around, they gathered calcium to themselves and became limestone in the end. But so, and this is the kind of stickiness we're talking about of a mortar like that, yeah?
Well, what you say would be the difference between your burnt lime and, let's say, an industrial one?
Shrinkage is the key difference. That's
More shrinkage
with the modern, yeah. We'll talk about this afternoon, yeah. So if we look, this is what's been going on. When this all started, as I say, it was driven from below, but the heritage organisations listened and were open to this, and they got involved. So we've got Historic Environment Scotland, Historic England, CADU, which is the Welsh equivalent, OPW, which is the Irish equivalent, Public Works, the Heritage Council of Ireland, all in a group to move this forward, to understand, to commission the research, to drive the research. And that's ongoing. It's all on. There's lots of research being commissioned into so we can understand these mortars. For me as a craftsman, I know they're right, but we do need to have the data as well. But that's subsequently, you know. And I have to tell you, at the very least, Historic Scotland and Historic England collaborating on anything is unprecedented, right? They are in absolute competition with one another all of the time. But hot mix has made these alliances. That's all I'm going to say. These alliances have come out of this movement. I will call it a movement. It is a movement. But so anyway, that's just to give you some idea. But you can look at that. And then so this is the Historic England position a while back now. But hot mix mortar embraces both non-hydraulic and gauged hydraulic pozzolanic mixes prepared with quicklime and used hot. It also covers mortars prepared by hot mixing and then stored, either as a dry hydrate, aggregate mix, or as a coarse stuff, and used at a later date when the materials are cold. This then embraces a huge palette of different types of mortar prepared by the same method. The method is the key here, for a wide variety of applications, as was the case of historically, all of which can be prepared by hot mixing. So that's the best definition. We get lots of NHL suppliers typically saying to homeowners, hot mix won't work. And you think, well, what is hot mix? It's a method, yeah, by which the most efficiently prepared mortars that give us the properties we want. It's a method. It's not a single thing. It's not NHL 3.5 you use for every possible thing, yeah. It's not a one-use mortar, or an everything does mortar. Historic Environment Scotland. Now this was their position 4 years ago. So like for like repair should be the starting point. Not all lime is traditional lime. You have to read between the lines on this one. Not all lime is traditional lime. Not all lime products are technically compatible with traditional buildings. Not all lime products are aesthetically compatible with traditional buildings. We encourage the use of traditional lime mortars for conservation and repair. We do not fund the use of formulated limes, i.e. premixes, okay? They will not fund them. That position has changed. For the last 3 years, their position has been, as an organisation, we will not support the use of natural hydraulic lime, wherever we have influence over that decision. They will not support it. And they've even went so far as to say, even if you can show us that the original mortar was natural hydraulic lime, you would have to demonstrate that the one you propose to use is exactly the same in its performance and characteristics and composition as the one they did use. So, you know, that's their position, and that's a hard position. Historic England are not far behind, but there's a lot more politics involved in Historic England's Well, I won't go into that, not now anyway. So just to give you some idea, and this is a bit old, but these are some of the major projects around the world actually where hot mixes have been used. So Calgary, Alberta, that is the norm in Calgary now. Earthline mortars were very common, and pertinently because Ukrainian emigrants took earthline mortar technology to Canada at that time in the 19th century. So the Memorial Library in Calgary, Coal Island where I work, historic site in Victoria, but the North York Moors National Park, Maria will not allow the use of natural hydraulic lime, full stop. It has to be like for like, and there is no like for like use in our region. Wrexham, a big town in Wales, and Wakefield in Yorkshire, where the money is given to do the historic buildings in the town as a grant, all only with hot mixes, no hydraulic lines in that equation. York Conservation Trust that own 85 of some of the most important historic buildings in York. Canterbury Cathedral, York Minster, that's York Minster. I said just it was Lincoln Cathedral. What an idiot I am. It's not. I'm sure you knew that, did you? But anyway, York Minster. I burned the lime for York Minster because they use a magnesium lime, as they did when they built it, and you can't buy that. So I burn their offcuts when they're doing the masonry, burn the lime. That's a nice circle, yeah, in sustainability terms. It used to just get thrown away, the waste stone. Durham Cathedral, Westminster Abbey, Grace Court, which is a big grand place near London. Reading Abbey ruins was all done with that. Scampston Hall, another big grand house. Crowland Abbey Church, Holy Trinity Church, I did that, that's the oldest in York. City of York in general, although anyway. And more interestingly from a frost perspective, Nidaros Cathedral in Trondheim, the most northerly cathedral in the world. And Stavanger Cathedral in Norway, where Emma, my apprentice, has been working now for 3 years. And just a few little things. Unless he's a water juggler, that's steam, yeah? So that's the hot mixing on a medieval site. This is hot mixing in Sweden. You can see the steam rising, and you can see also that is being mixed, and that's going straight up to those guys to be used. So no dwell times. I'm not going to dwell on this, but when I say I've been through building accounts, this is, in a good case, this is what you get. So this is for this house. It was before they later clad it in stone, but underneath is the brick building that they're talking about here. And just look at the detail. There is no room for error in some of these. And in the terms of lime, which is a chalk lime, a pure lime, 1,111 and 1/8 loads. This is not just random, this is very precise. And you will also see here 19¼ bushels of taris, that's another spelling of trass, volcanic ash, and that is used for cisterns and for the water the water tanks and things. It's a water lime, yeah, and cow hair and everything else. But I've been through hundreds of these. So traditional mortar proportions, I've talked about that. What I want to say, just to make this clear, you will very, very rarely find a lime mortar that is leaner than 1 lime to 2 anywhere in the world, and they're often richer than that. And that is achieved by mixing at 1 quicklime to 3 typically, because although that's 2 to 3, on analysis, of course, there are lime lumps in there that are not binders. So in terms of binder terms, and whenever they specify slate lime, whenever you see, in Britain anyway, whenever you see 1 lime to 3 sand, that means quicklime. They knew that, they didn't have to say it. But if they wanted slate lime, they explicitly say slate lime. And that is 1 to 2 at the leanest, yeah? So that's kind of what tells us what they're aiming for.
Also for bedding mortars? Like
Yeah, all of them. Yeah, well, except when they weren't using earth lime, of course, yeah. And the hydraulic limes as too, they were made from quicklime, but they do not expand anything like as much. Sometimes not, if they're eminently hydraulic, not very, hardly at all. So they're mixing those at 1 to 2 as a minimum, as the leanest. And again, we mix at 1 to 3. That is not right, okay? It's one of the reasons then they've got so little workability. You mix at 1 to 2, there's a bit more workability, you know. But, so an earthline mortar, as I said, we've said 10 to 20%. Now, these are all traditional slaking methods. I'm not going to dwell on those. Those are for you to read later, but primarily because we're going to be talking about them this afternoon with the materials in front of us. But it's just to show you that the ordinary or common method And that's what it's called in every country I know. Telling us that is the method that's used most of the time for most things. And that's to reduce lump lime to a size that you can mix with the sand. That's all it's about. So the ordinary method, a ring of sand, quicklime in the middle, pour, give it water, not the other way around, give it the water it needs in just sufficient, bank it over to slake for a little while. And the slaking of a pure lime takes 2 or 3 minutes. It's not hours, yeah, it's 2 or 3 minutes. As I say, the slaking of a hydraulic lime, maybe 12 hours, maybe 36. So it's a completely different thing. Direct mixing, mixing powdered quicklime with sand, not as uncommon as we think. They did pulverize their lime, and they always say when they use it that it made the strongest mortar of all. I would say that is simply because it is all binder. There are no lumps, yeah? Aspersion or immersion, that's just dribbling water on it. Enough, just sufficient, as they always say, to slake it to a dry hydrate, and then you can make it to a paste. But after the slake is complete. We'll talk about all this afternoon. Air slaking, just leaving it in the air to slake, that can take 6 months. They all talk about it and then they'll go on and say, but nobody does that. You know, I mean, it's one of those things. And then sand slaking, which is that method, but you let it all go cold. And has been much confused over the years by John Ashurst, by many people. They think that is hot mixing. But if you put that lime in the middle, you give it the water, you bank it over and you walk away for a couple of days, and when you come to mix the sand with the lime, it's cold. That is not hot mixing, that is sand slaking. You're just using the sand as the container in which you slake the lime. That's all you're doing to a cold material. Very different outcome in terms of workability and so on. And just a little example from Chicago, you know, a layer of sand, the quicklime, give it that, mix it to a mortar, put it out to sit ready for use. Simple process. And that's Chicago in 1924, okay, not in the midst of time. Now, this quote here, I'm going to dwell on this, 1703, another bricklaying book. When you slake the lime, take care to wet it everywhere a little, but do not overwet it, and cover with sand every laying or bed of lime, so that the steam or the spirit of the lime, this is a mystical thing, the spirit of the lime may be kept in, it's not, may be kept in and not flee away, but mix itself with the sand, which will make the mortar much stronger than if you slake all your lime first and throw your sand on altogether at last, as some do. You know, this is not, we're not talking iron rules here, but this mention of steam is so common, and that this paragraph alone has launched a 50, with the pre-research and now Historic of England, a full block, £40,000 research project into what happens when you slake with steam. We know that what happens is something different, and that method, you're not only slaking with liquid water, some of the slake has been done by steam, yeah? And that's significant. Steam makes different bonds, I'm told, by the chemists and the physicists. So, yeah, that's all significant. So we won't, and then just other descriptions. I'm not going to dwell, but this description is the same. In France, this is a guy in London, but he was Irish. This is a description of powdered quicklime mixing, which is a different method, but we're going to do that this afternoon. And this is from Spain, again, ordinary method, exactly the same. And I'm confident that these methods are the same everywhere in the world, because these methods are driven by the material, by quicklime. That's what it asks, that's what it demands. And then this very long description from Gilmore in 1864 in America. This man was a genius. If you have any text, read Gilmore's writings. But he was an engineer, don't forget, so he likes hydraulic materials, but that's the description. And more surprisingly, this is pretty much exactly the same description from Modern Practical Building 1950, the book that architects, masons, anyone training would have been given in 1950, and he's describing hot mixing. That's all he's describing. This is another name for it, the larrying method. A larry is a hoe. So you're tempering and working it with a hoe beyond when you've got the water content right. But and there is a version of the ordinary method in Canada on the island. We used seawater to slake. We didn't use fresh water. We didn't have fresh water. Yeah. So and there, alongside other descriptions of powder mixing from France, de la Fay, and from Martin, and there is a version of that, if you like. So you mix everything together from the beginning. You don't need to go through a double handling. But we'll say we're going to do that. And then just this one, which is interesting, because we've got dry slaking, we've got wet slaking. You take it to a dry core stuff or a wet one. And this guy is making a distinction there. You'll do the dry slaking if you have to carry it to site. But if you're on site, you'll take it straight through to a wet usable mortar. That's just logistics, weight, different weights and so on. You know, they didn't have pickup trucks, did they, in those days? So, and this one, just a quick one on this. When we did a workshop in Ottawa, I left Ottawa thinking I needed a bodyguard next time I came, but nonetheless, because engineers rule in Ottawa, but not in a good way. Yeah, but but so we sampled. We were hot mixing at the workshop, and the National Research Council was sampling those as we made them. These are the 3 we made, and you'll see that after 90 days, they're all 2 MPa. The one they did, which they thought was hot mixing before we arrived, was sand slaking. So they let it all go cold before they mixed it, and you'll see they're coming in at half the strength. So that's a fair indicator. When you hot mix, you're getting twice the compressive strength typically as you might get in a cold mixed mortar. So that's significant. You know, 2 MPa. Who needs more than that? We don't need more than that to build a 10-story building, as long as it's solid wall construction. Again, the US barrier standards are very clear. A 9-story building required a mortar that was, it could be as little strength as 1/3 of a Newton. 1/3 of an MPa was sufficient for a building of 9 stories, as long as the walls are solid wall construction. Yeah, that's the critical thing. So that's just a little insight, and further evidence is showing that. So hot mixed mortars with some pozzolan, but not a lot, in the Roman period. This Roman lighthouse, one of our few standing Roman buildings in Britain, and this is an analysis of a mortar, a Roman mortar, 2 Roman mortars, but this one from the bathhouse at Vindelander, so a wet, humid place. 8% brick pozzolan added to that, but the proportion, you know, 1 to 1.3 actually in proportional terms. This one is a building mortar, a walling mortar, Roman again from the same period, and Bill was certain, the analyst, that that was placed hot. That one wasn't, and mixed hot placed, and mixed hot and placed cold. So that one was mixed hot. The pozzolanic one, that one was mixed and then used a bit later. But the proportions you can see, very lime rich, and Roman, of course. So, and this building is linked in so far as this Anglo-Saxon church tower is built of Roman spolia from the nearby Corbridge Roman fort. So we've got Roman elements in that building. Sadly, the client, the Church Conservation Trust, could only afford to take the cement out of the top half, not the bottom half, but it does give us a nice example, because you can see how cloudy that is. That's because that fabric is wet, allowing lichens and algae and moss to grow. Slate lime is called dead lime, and it's live when it's quick lime. And of course, that's the same in English. Quick is Anglo-Saxon for alive. Yeah.
Hebrew also.
Yeah, is it? Yeah.
Live, yeah.
Well, it tells us a lot, though, isn't it, in that way. But anyway, that's Gilmore again. But that's him saying, sorry, I forgot the significance of that. He's saying, yes, engineers are saying you should make the lime and lay it down, all these things. But then at the end says, although the practice in this country, the USA, conforms to hot mixing with singular unanimity. So this you've got to be careful when you read text. You often have to read between the lines. He's saying, oh, engineers are saying do that, but actually on site, this is what's happening, again, because it's us that were in charge of that. The masons are in charge of the mortars. So hot mixes, how do we identify them? I've chosen to use an example from Haifa. So just, this is plaster. There are the lumps that indicate hot mixing. They tend to be angular. They can be underburned lime, they can be overburned lime, they can just be lump lime that hadn't slaked at the point that the mortar was put on or in the wall, that then just carbonate as a lump, that's all. But they tend to be angular. If you've got big fluffy lumps, that indicates hydrate or lime putty, but you'll rarely see that because they didn't use lime putty, they did use hydrate. They made it on site there and then. But so that's that, and this is the plaster finish, or before the final finish. That's the backing, obviously, but you can see very clearly. And there are the lime washes, which I would be certain were applied as a hot lime wash made directly from quicklime. So another example, this is a medieval brick from Hull, where bricks began to be made again from the earliest period. Here are the lumps indicating hot mixes. This is not a medieval brick. This is from a Frank Lloyd Wright building in Chicago, but we have exactly the same. For those masons in the room, why do American masons think that's a good idea, not to fully bed a brick when they bed it? It's wrong. There's no capillary movement in that space. So anyway, and then some projects. So this is the Folly and Settle. This was before it was repointed, so it's got cement in it. It's quite a nice day, so it's not a cheat, not entire cheat. This was done over the winter before last. So right through the winter, this was done by a guy who'd never used hot mixes before in his life. He was a lime worker. He'd used NHLs. He'd used lime putties. But so, and that the only thing that wants, and I couldn't persuade the architect of that now wants lime washing, in my opinion, as it would have been in the past. But that's still a difficult argument in Britain, very often. Not always, but very often.
In terms of architecture.
Yeah, to lime wash is quite difficult. Changing the appearance, it hits. So other projects, this is another guy. I want to show these partly because I'm full of respect for these young guys. They've embraced this in the last year or two, and they are doing great work with it. And they're the ones taking this forward more than me. I hope that will happen in a way, because these are the young guys. These are the guys who are going to keep this going. We won't forget about it again, is what I'm saying. But he did this end the last year with NHL. Look at it. Lime bleeding down all over the place. This is in West Yorkshire, so high driven rain index. He then early this year, or just last, I then turned him over to hot mixing. He'd been going to the Scottish Lime Centre Trust, learning about the wonders of NHL. But he did this, and then obviously he could see the difference. This is dry, that's not dry, and so on. And then at his own expense, having finished that, removed all of that NHL and put hot mix in. So that's a guy with integrity and and fully understands what's going on. But I hope that gives you some idea of the difference in the same climate and everything else with the same stone. This is not a false comparison. Other work, local builder, never used lime before, probably not even NHL before. That's their work. This another guy who's recently converted to hot mixing in Norfolk. And this is what's happening all over the country. And a lot of this happened. I mean, this is a guy that I turned over just on Facebook during lockdown, because there was all this activity on the lime groups. And there's a guy in Vermont that I spoke to regularly on Facebook. He's now set up as a lime supplier, selling quicklime and everything else. And so it doesn't, you don't have to be face to face. Not that I'm a huge fan of Facebook, don't get me wrong, but blimey, it can have effects. And in Canada, similarly, projects have been done by people who just talked to us on Facebook and then gone and done it. And they've been hugely successful. And this is what's happening everywhere around Britain, in the States, all over the place. So it's not just the big projects. This is an older one of ours, but that's a hot mix there. That was done 6 months before with NHL2. Now, you might say there's not a great difference, but there is in my opinion, there's a significant difference in water content in those two walls. Other jobs done by other masons with hot mixes, hot mix plastering, hot lime washing, and that's in Fort McMurray in Alberta. And that was that big forest fire that they had approaching it a few years back, but it didn't quite get there. Okay. So, and then hot mix is historic. The ability to build flint work with a hot mix mortar is probably the only mortar that you could build flint work with. You've got not porous nodules, and you can, with lime putty or NHL even, you can build maybe 2 courses and then they all start to swim around. So you've got to stop for 2 weeks. And some people actually go as far as that's what they did historically. Why would they do that? No, but with a hot mix, you can just build straight up with flint, with non-porous stones, and you do not get swimming. We'll talk about that later, why that is. And something, a Saxon church, again, obviously hot mixes, and little brick noggins as well. These are just half bricks, you know, but it works. The Old Sun Inn, this is one of Maria's particular projects in the national park, from, I think, that section 14th century maybe, 15th certainly, and then it's accreted areas. It was pointed with 116 82. On the face of it, that's not causing major damage to the stone. But when we thought inside that, on the other side of that wall, where next to the door, the lime wash was very wet and damp, clearly damp. So we justified what we wouldn't otherwise perhaps have been able to justify, doing a sample panel. And in the course of that, it was quickly apparent to me, and I'd been working from the inside through the lockdown. It's one of my lockdown hideouts. Through the earth lime and earth mortars inside were wet, and yet the outside didn't appear to be. So, but of course, what had happened? They hadn't made contact when they'd repointed. They hadn't contacted the new mortars with the old mortars, and so you had voids. And again, vapor is not going to jump from there to there and come out, and capillary movement can't work. We had a problem at this end. We did this inside this gable here. It's up here, and the earlier it was lime plaster, but salts had really started to rip it apart because of moisture coming through and then drying in the summers. We couldn't work it out. We thought this has been renewed, and we thought there was a problem there, so we dealt with that. And then the next winter, all this plaster became saturated again. So we then bit the bullet and said, right, so last April I took that out, and this is up on the moors, high wind driven index, west facing, so getting all of the rain, hitting it. So that's just a straight ordinary hot mix, no porcelain, except a little bit of wood ash, not a lot. And we did it. The thatch was repaired, and this winter the whole wall is dry all of the time. So, and that's just and this is just taking back to what we were talking about at the beginning. When I knocked out the cement, the 116 and NHL that had been used in places subsequently, none of that mortar had made a bond with the stone at all. It's there, and you can't see that it hasn't made a bond. But so it took me half the time, if not more, even less than that, to take it out. It's still bloody irritating because it's hard and it's wedged, but no bond. So, you know, simple. That's why the water was coming through the wall every time it rained. And now we've got a hot mix with a good bond. No water comes through. So I hope, case closed, I hope, you know, but, and we will get the rest done eventually. And then this is the inside with hot lime washes. So, and look at the radiance of these, you know. That's Maria, actually. She was helping me, and she was doing that, and she didn't know I was going to lime wash the window. So I'd done it, and then she turned around and said, oh my God, I didn't know you were going to... But it was lime washed before, and it is again now, and that's that. So, but, and that's a different colour, obviously, but the colour of that is coming from my own burned lime. We did use, in this particular building, I did burn the lime for it, and of course it's reflecting the colour of the stone, so it's not white, it's cream, but that's coming from the lime, you know. And then quickly the Yemen, we're into lime putty. Are we doing all right for time? Lime putty, this is bread dough, lime putty, this is the Yemen. The only real, in this part of the Yemen, in the earth building regions of the Yemen, they only use lime for lime washing. So yeah, they're not hot lime washing, they're not doing that. But traditionally, they would beat this lime that they're going to make into a lime wash only 3 days. 2 men, 3 days. Thwonk. Thwonk. These days they do it for 1 day, but there's still a lot, isn't it? And they actually, I've seen it, they put this lime wash on with their hands, yeah? There's a great film out there, if you have Mud Masons of the Yemen, if you can get it, it's one of the most inspiring films ever made. The Mud Masons of the Yemen, every time I see stuff on the news, I'm thinking, where are these guys now, you know, with what's going on in the Yemen? But they're wonderful guys. And then just for a little laugh, that's a couple of traditional Spanish lime workers, i.e. the woman of the house in Spain, because annual lime washing in Spain, as in lots of places, is not because of need, not because the material has failed, it's for antiseptic qualities. It's spring cleaning is what it is, yeah? And of course it's done typically by the woman of the house, and her only health and safety equipment is her apron, yeah? So Yeah, and I just wish I had one of her up on the top of that ladder somehow. But anyway, this isn't lime wash. This is linseed oil, sandcast linseed oil on joinery. This is Capability Brown, very famous landscape architect. And that's a colour wash, so no lime in that. Alum as the binder, and beer. Alum and old beer was and pigment. But on the back, a hot lime wash, 2 coats. And I think you can see straight away that's giving you a very different surface to the lime wash we think was lime wash, yeah? The very thin stuff, watery thin stuff.
Before picture?
Well, it's not a before, that's a joinery, that's all timber and so on, except for the stone here. And everything's timber, it's an illusion, except for the stone at the bottom level. But a very important structure, and then lime washed, as I say, on the back. Lime washed brickwork. Shelter coat, this is one of my projects, and that church that I showed earlier in Malton. Beautiful, in beautiful condition for all that it was built in 1250. Yeah? But we've had a hell of a lot of salt problem down at this level. Crowland Abbey, and I've got this in, those that know, the lime revival is always said to have started at Wells Cathedral in Somerset with Professor Baker. But there were 2. Crowland Abbey is the other, where the lime revival started in Britain. This is work by Robert and Eve Baker, and guys that trained me at Nimbus Conservation worked here too, and worked at Wells. So I am in a direct line of descent from the lime revival. Some think, so I'm betraying that training in a way, but I'm not. That's where, that 40 years later, that's the lime method with lean lime putty mixes. So yeah, it's not done any damage, but it's lasted 40 years. It's quite gratifying to me with this a phrase which I didn't coin, the new lime revival, where we are now, that same project has been done it was done 5 years ago now, with hot mixes throughout. Hot mix mortars, hot mix pointing, hot mix shelter coats. And they're very different animals for anyone who wants, we can talk about that later. And the conservator, obviously had only ever used lime putty typically, said, well, it's a lime wash with some aggregate in it to imitate the colour, match the colour of the new stone. That's the idea. And to offer a sacrificial layer over the top. So you mortar repair and then you bring it all together with a shelter coat. I think it's great, and it's a Robert Baker thing. Again, everything he did was admirable, except for the mistake he made about the line proportions and so on. So his original work lasted 40 years. I am absolutely confident that this work that's now been done will last 100, 200 years. That's the difference we're talking about here. And if you really want sacrificiality, if the fabric is so important that you can't possibly risk, then yeah, lime putty is the way, but it's not going to last. And we're in a world where we need to be sustainable. It is not good enough with lime putty too lean, or NHLs, because that's the pattern, that you need to do it every 20 years again. That's not sustainable, is it? We need to be using a mortar that delivers the performance, that looks after these buildings, that will last indefinitely in the absence of obvious decay mechanisms. So isn't that sustainability in action? That's where we need to be now. And then lime putty again, this was the norm in the 20th century. You can see this pit is 3 meters deep. These were hideous health and safety things for kids who like playing on building sites and everything else. But this is the first time in Britain, 1937, earlier of course, where they are running lime to putty for the first time really. But again, they're having, even though they're filling that 10-foot deep pit, they're taking that that lime putty out typically after 2 weeks, and it's still hot because you've got this such a huge volume of it to cool down. And I would say they overcame their historic suspicion about its binding qualities, because by this time they were always going to gauge it with Portland cement. That overcame that. I've done experiments now, and if you make I actually do it 138, so because Portland cement has got harder and harder, so a 129 now would be much stronger than a 129 then. So you amend that, one Portland cement, 3 putty lime, 8 sand, creates a mortar that is as workable almost as a hot mix. So that, I believe, is the real reason they're using lime putty for the first time, because they're getting a material that is very like what they've just stopped using, i.e. a hot mix that's very workable, very sticky and so on, and very lime rich. You know, that's 75% of the binder in that is lime, yeah? That's probably twice what there is in one of the more lime rich NHLs, twice the free lime. So, and that's, I won't dwell there, but that's a scaffolder who giving me this oral, because he was a scaffolder going around everywhere, telling me what they did, because in his observation. And you can see no more than 2 weeks before using it, still hot and dangerous in his opinion, when they opened the pit to use it. And then the guy who was talking to his granddad about it said, well, what about hot mixing as we're talking about? He said straight away, no, he's a stonemason. His granddad said, no, that's your crowd. The stonemasons who used it like that. This is 1950s Liverpool, yeah? It's not in the mists of time, history. So lime putty is used on its own. This is 1893 construction. This is the mortar from 1893, and that's in Scotland, the place where they tell us you can only ever use natural hydraulic lime, but that has proved entirely durable for over 100 years in Scotland, and that's the other place there in gauge brickwork, as we call it. And here again, but this is Pasley describing the term putty, better known as the cement for fixing window glass. So it's not he feels the need to explain what it is. It's not it's not so common. Is applied to brickwork which is nearly the same as hot lime grout. It is made by dissolving a small quantity of water, as much hot lime as when slaked and continually stirred up. Oh, sorry, yeah, that's right. We'll assume the consistency of mud. It is then sifted. So the strategy is not to lay it down for late slaking, it's to actually push it through a sieve to remove those lumps in order to remove the unburnt parts of the lime, and should be used without delay. So this afternoon you'll see some maybe 20-year-old aged lime putty that we made 2 days ago, if that doesn't sound silly. But and then a similar description, and again, note, take out the groat, use a hair sieve. If anyone can tell me what a hair sieve looked like, I'd love to know. Unimaginable to me, a hair sieve. But anyway, take out the gross parts of the lime, it's fit for use. Immediate, and I would say hot use. And if you mix a lime putty made like that when it's still hot, the outcome is that's a hot mix method, yeah? It's not what we think. And that's Barty Langley. So, yeah, I used lime putty in my career. Obviously I did. This is back in '92 we did this on the Isle of Portland with 1 to 3 lime putty. It's lasted, you know, I'm not saying it doesn't. It's not a material that any builder is ever going to use. It's not going to mainstream lime. That's what I believe about it. Whereas our experience right now, because we're upskilling ordinary builders in the national park and elsewhere, they love hot mix material. They are going to take, in many ways in our country, it's ordinary builders that are going to take this forward, not conservators, because a lot of them are still resisting and, oh no, we want to use natural hydraulic lime and all this. So, you know, this is a weird contradiction, because the lime revival has spent the last 40 years condemning ordinary builders as idiots, as all these things. But they're the ones who are recognizing the utility of a hot mix more, and they're using it even when Maria's not making them. That's the point. And these are guys that previously only used sand and cement. Yeah. So, and then plastering again, it's only in the 20th century that plaster was made with lime putty. And this is 1780. The plasterers who make their mortar by the hot mix method and lay the mortar down to allow for late slaking. Again, the method gives the quality if you have to lay it down for a period. But again, you'd be surprised that that's not usually more. I mean, Nicholson is a guy who says, well, you have to lay it down for a long time to allow for late slaking. And then in the next sentence is, so after a week, use it. So you know, the time is different is in their world to ours. And so that's just a description of that. This is another one, but from Miller, this book is biblical in Britain, 1898. But he's saying, yeah, limes which are unsuitable for plasterwork, known as hot limes, i.e. used hot, not mixed hot, not mixed hot, but used hot. They have to maybe lay down, not 3, sometimes, depending on the lime, sometimes 3 months. There's that figure. I've only seen that twice in history. Alberti in 1460, and this guy. That's the only time laying down for 3 months is mentioned.
Why did you say 3 months?
Well, it depends on the line, because it's to get rid of the slaking. But most importantly, he says that's for plastering, but for ordinary hot limes are the limes mostly used for building purposes. Yeah, everything else. 1898, okay, in London. Just a few examples: hot lime wash, hot mix mortars. I didn't do this. Sam Baxter, a friend of mine, did, but I designed and managed this for Natural England. Natural England, who are the farm, the landscape people, they supported the use of hot mixes right from the get-go and allowed us to build a portfolio of success in a way, if you like, and beautiful work. That's in my village actually. In York, this is a project we did. We replaced an awful lot of these timbers because they've been cement rendered and that had just caused massive decay. This is one of the oldest frames in York, 1430, and you can see we've lime washed the whole, which is the traditional way. When all the infill panels reinstated with hot mix bricks laid in hot mix and hot mix plasters, then hot lime wash over the whole. This is another hot mix job. That's the frame under here, but only under here, is 1316, part of the oldest timber frame. It's a long terrace in York, the oldest timber frame in Britain. This is the only part of that timber frame that has got a compatible lime mortar on. The rest is rendered in cement and the timber frame is rotting. And it is the oldest, 1316 in York. And it's a disgrace. It's a disgrace. But anyway, and the back of it looks like that. And that's hot mix pointed. Again, done over a really hard winter 2 winters ago. No issues with frost. So, hydraulic lime. Hey, look, we're within sight of the end. Sorry, Maria and I spent 5 hours, well, Maria particularly, reordering this talk last night to make sure I could get through it in 2 hours, or hopefully that I could get through it in 2 hours. Right, hydraulic lime. So this is in Moulton. This is the quay, historic quay. Troussart, a contemporary of Vicat. Although we give this compound the name of hydraulic lime, it ought in fact to be regarded as a substance altogether different from lime. It is a new body with new properties. I wish we'd understood that a few years ago, and he's right. Okay, so Robert Boynton again, 1980, not very long ago. A major problem confronting most hydraulic lime manufacturers is lack of uniformity in the finished project, namely shipping a lime with a cementation index of 0.92 one day, 0.7 the next, and so on. The chemical analyses of impure deposits frequently change abruptly from one ledge and stratum to another. Blending of stone to secure a composite analysis alleviates this problem to some extent, but can never be pursued with the same flexibility. And I have to say, I'm on camera. I shouldn't say, but I am.
Say it.
They don't give a shit about that in the industry. It's as it comes today. Sorry, that's the least of my swear words actually. So furthermore, the intensive analytical testing that it entails is costly. It does happen in the Portland cement industry, but it's easier for whatever reason. This chronic problem with quality control more than any other factor has forced hydraulic lime to lose position primarily to Portland cement and masonry cement. And you would argue cement lime, because that's a predictable version of the same. And this is David Jefferson, who's a very eminent and belligerent, but highly respected and highly good. Sorry, I'm struggling for words. This is his opinion. The use of natural hydraulic lime has become extremely common in conservation work in recent years. The reasons for this are not clear, although a complete ignorance of what the material consists of, coupled with hard selling by the manufacturers, are probably the two main factors. And I couldn't disagree with him. Yeah, he worked 30 years in the cement industry before he does what he does now, so he kind of knows how these things work. So the British standard in the past for feebly hydraulic lime, which we called in the 20th century semi-hydraulic lime, this is after 28 days, a maximum of 2 MPa, a minimum of less than half an MPa. And as I've just said to you, we get those strengths reliably with a pure lime hot mix. So, but feebly hydraulic lime again, 5% clay typically. The incentive to use that was not strength, because I've seen plenty of analyses from this period where actually with the same sand and everything and the same proportions, the pure lime delivers the stronger mortar. The feebly hydraulic lime is a weaker mortar. But of course it gets there a bit quicker, and critically, as I said earlier, you can make them artificially by putting in 5% of a pot's land. It had less initial shrinkage. That was the incentive, yeah? Not really that it was more durable or anything else. This is the BSE, the European Union standard, which we obviously have adopted, BS 890. So this is what we're looking at. Now this is a false test, you know, it's done by weight. It's done with a sand you would never use, but it's again one that can be reproduced in every lab in Europe easily. So it's put into just random bag numbers because it doesn't. But of course, all of these fit in this overlap, so they're all to standard, whatever strength they are. This Historic England are very clear. This standard is utterly unfit for purpose. It tells the user absolutely nothing. This is for producers, yeah, to make sure they're making it. And the other thing, on test, of course, a lot of these don't even reach these strengths after 28 days. In reality, when you make a real mortar, they don't. It's only in the lab when it's done by weight. So it's all weird and it tells you nothing. But however, Historic England tested all the ones that we use, made a mortar, a real mortar with real sand at 1 to 2, the leanest proportion that NHLs would be ever, 1 to 2. And this is the air lime control made with lime putty, sadly, instead of hot mix. I think the hot mix one would be up here, but still flattening and so on. So I think you can see there's an issue here, that every single brand is a different strength on this day. That's the only flaw in this research. This is the strength these brands were on that day. The simplest research, little project they did, as an example, they bought 2 bags of the same natural hydraulic lime, same number, in 2 different parts of England on the same day, had them tested in 2 labs, independent. Sorry?
Same producer as well.
Yeah, same, no, exactly the same brand. Yeah, had them tested in 2 parts of England on the same day, and in both cases, the result was that one of them delivered a mortar that was 30% stronger than the other. So that's the extent of variability, as Boynton said earlier, that's the extent of variability within the same source. But then you move out and you look at, well, these are from different, look at the variation here. So I can tell you now, just to keep it quick, the lowest, the weakest, or just about the weakest on, is an NHL 3.5, St. Astier. The strongest, right up here, is an NHL 3.5, Round Tower. It's not a 5 and it's not a 2. And all I'm trying to show you here is not only this variability. Why would you use? Because what architect says use this particular brand, this number. It's NHL 3.5. And in fact, in the UK, the cheapest are the worst. One of the cheapest is the Cecil from Portugal, 3% free lime. They're even breaking the standard. The standard demands a minimum of 15% free lime in a 5, 25% minimum in a 3.5, and so on. What you do find in their product is in their NHL 5, 15% limestone dust. Well, natural hydraulic lime definition, you don't add anything to it, yeah? 15% limestone. In their 3.5, 25% limestone dust. Again, exploiting ignorance about what free lime is. Free lime is lime, not limestone dust, yeah? And they get away with it. And as I say, a recent analysis that just looked at the free lime I saw, 3% free lime. It's a natural cement, which they're seeking to mitigate, to make it look like, anyway. So, and that's the most commonly used in Britain. That's around here somewhere. It's in here, Singleton Birch. It goes under an English brand name and the Portuguese brand name. But nonetheless, I don't think I need to say more. And the other thing to say is look at the period of maximum strength gain. You know, the 28-day strength test is for Portland cement, because that's the period of maximum strength gain in Portland cement, the first 28 days. It'll develop typically 95% of its strength in those first 28, unless it's gauged with lime, in which case it's then 3 months is the setting time. But, and you know, in old, not that old books, 1950s, 60s, it's well understood that you didn't just put Portland cement mortar in a wall and walk away. It needed ongoing hydration for 28 days. for it to set properly, spraying it, or a concrete floor. I've seen the specs, lay Hessian on, pour buckets of water on that floor for 28 days, feeding it during that period of maximum strength gain. If we apply that logic to NHL, we should be wetting these materials every day for 6 months after placement. And interestingly, VCAR, the prompt, which is not a natural hydraulic lime, it's a natural cement, but essentially the mineralogy, the ingredients are the same, there's just no free lime left. They cure their samples that they develop their technical data from underwater for 6 months. And then they test it. And I would actually argue that these materials can only get the hydration they need to really set properly underwater for the first period of their set. It's not enough to spray them for a couple of days, believe me. The likely consequence of that, because we see it in Britain, is that a mortar that looks set on the face, dig in, it's not mortar inside, it's powder or it's mush. It's certainly not mortar. So if they set fully properly, you give them all that, they're going to be far too hard and far too little capillary active to keep the building dry. If you don't do that, they're not a mortar that can get rid of moisture, they just let it in. And it builds and struggles to get out. So I hope that's shocking to everyone in the room, yeah? And the other thing to say is, yes, we've got 6 months of maximum period of strength gain, but then we've got steady climbing curves, which are typically gaining half an MPa every year. And that's half an MPa gain in strength and an equivalent, not equivalent, but a lowering in the porosity that it does have, a densification of the pores system. That's what's happening. So they might be, sometimes first pointed, the building doesn't look wet. It maybe takes a year or 2 years for it to start to build and build. And as I think I've shown you, 20 years, we're in trouble. Yeah, we really start to see the consequences. By which time it might be too late for a limestone that's been having to do all the work and collecting salt in its arises. They're going to powder away. But anyway.
What happened after 1,000 days?
Sorry?
What happened after 1,000
Well,
days?
the testing stopped.
In time, 20 years,
Well,
30 years.
exactly that. And we, as I say, at the very least, we have the right to say to any producer who's selling us this, tell me when this strength gain stops, or I won't buy your product.
Portland cement is about 70 years, and it starts going down.
Yeah, well, actually, wait and see. Cement lines are different, put it that way. So this is the Historic England position on this with the standard. There's no equivalence between the historic classifications. Standard mortar mixes are not representative. Testing at 28 days, not representative. Curing regime for NHL suppresses strength development, although you'll see in a minute, most of them, their NHL2 is their strongest mortar. The classification is too wide. Little realistic information for end users. BSE N49 is not suitable as a tool for specifying NHL binders. That is the position of Historic England. This standard is not fit for purpose. So anyone who uses standards as a comfort blanket, this is not a comfort blanket. It's full of holes and you'll get very cold. So, sorry, I just made that one up actually, but anyway. So a bit more detail here. This is over time, but you can see they did 116. Whoa, 10 MPa, 129. But this is the pattern, and the US Bureau of Standards identified this too. Cement line mortars reach the maximum, and then their strength drops. Yeah, you just said that, did you? Is that what you said? But this is after 3 months. They've reached maximum strength after 3 months, typically. These are metakaolin gauge mortars, CL90, so airline with metakaolin, and you can see there's their strength there, and look, blimey. There's no, the NHLs are all stronger than that, is the point we're making, and so on. So, and this is all, obviously you're going to get this slideshow, but this is only after a year, bear in mind. And so at that point, the 129, which comes in at about 4 MPa, oh no, it's 2 there. Oh, I'm wrong about that then. That is, oh no, that's the metakaolin mixes, sorry. I'm getting confused. That's the ordinary airline mix. That's where I'm at. This is the 129, and yeah, it's stronger than most of them. After 3 years, it is not. It's weaker than most of them because they're continuing to gain strength. And 129, I would say, is too strong. Trusar, again, we are much more certain to obtain uniform results with hydraulic mortars composed of fat lime, sand, and trass, brick, tile, whatever, pozzolan, than those that we can make of artificial or natural hydraulic lime and sand only. So, you know, this belief that that was more reliable and more predictable, and I won't dwell there. And then if we look to the river walls of the Houses of Parliament, Barry the architect, so the hydraulic materials he's used in there, one measure of the best burned feebly hydraulic lime, that is, so maybe 4%, 5% clay, one measure of finely ground genuine Italian pozzolan, and 2 measures of sharp above bridge sand. That is the water line being used on the Houses of Parliament in the 1850s. 1849 is it? I don't know. But anyway, and it's hot mixed. He makes that clear as well, as with the other mortars. So pozzolans, it was really John Smeaton who was the first to understand that it was fired clay that gave this reaction. No one knew before, they just knew they sat underwater. And so they typically used the whole of the aggregate was trass, as we saw with Batty Langley right at the beginning. The whole aggregate is pozzolanic, but you're wasting money. There's only, you know, one pozzolan by weight can only will combine with 2 parts of lime, and then that's it. There's no more combination, so the rest is aggregate. So Smeaton made it his business to go around identifying the pozzolans that were available. These were known already, but they didn't know why they worked. Pumice, volcanic ash, pozzolan from Mount Vesuvius, trass, volcanic ash, minions, which is calcined ironstone. We have mortars made with that on the North York moors where they're burning ironstone. The aggregates are just the waste from the kiln. So you've got everything mixed in, calcined ironstone, fuel ash, and so on. And they don't make hard mortars, this is the point. They make mortars you can snap and that are quite openly porous. Not that one in particular, I mean. Coal cinders, coal ash, brick and tile dust, wood ash, Smith's Forge ashes, iron filings. And yeah, that's true. I've seen elevations full of little orange rust dots. Well, they just used iron filings as a pozzolanic addition. And that's where blacksmith's forge ashes, of course, they're a mixture of fuel ash and iron that's been beaten out of the iron. So modern pozzolans, we've got slate dust, microsilica, calcined china clay, metakaolin, and PFA. These are mostly, leaving aside that one, these are typically 89% more powerful than traditional pozzolans. So bear that in mind. They're very powerful compared to traditional pozzolans.
What do you mean by powerful?
Well, their hydraulic energy is 89% more. So they'll make a harder mix and maybe get there quicker, but is that a good thing?
What does 89% more?
The hydraulic energy in the modern pozzolans. They're more energetic, as VK would say. And then Smeaton was the one who said, okay guys, you're wasting your time you're wasting money using 3 parts of pozzolanic material to 1 lime. You only need 1 part of quicklime, 2 parts of sharp sand, 1 part of pozzolan. He didn't know the chemistry of it, but he was absolutely right. There is no point. If you want your water to set underwater, 30% of the aggregate should be pozzolan, and that will leave no free lime if it all combines, won't necessarily, and so on. So just a few examples. Lastly, are we all right? Am I way over time?
That's okay.
This is a clay, you know, cobbles laid in earth. This was a project, and rats had been through big time, yeah? So you had all these cavities and everything else. The contractor filled those cavities with NHL and then laid the cobbles in NHL. This is a natural wetting in winter, you know, the humidity rising, but I just want to make the point. The moisture, the capillary active moisture is coming through the clay. They look as they might as well be dry because there is no capillary movement through that material, yeah? And we need that. So, and just briefly, concrete, as I say, but you can read those. I've shown you that one. This is on the same site. They rebuilt this porch with NHL 3.5. I think we can all agree the mortar is not managing the salts in that structure. The stone is having to do it. And that's a disaster for that stone in the longer term, yeah? Recent repointing with NHL in Wakefield, before they've now switched over, everything will be done by hot mixes. And already after 2 years, where we've got moisture coming up, the stone is starting to powder. This is after 2 years, yeah? It's being lifted off by salt activity because the mortars are not behaving, they're not taking those salts. Again, Lincoln Castle, this is a new build. And, you know, the architect thinking, oh, it's great, lime's breathable. We don't need a damp-proof membrane. We don't need damp-proof course because it's all breathable. It's NHL. This isn't just salt on the surface. This is powdering limestone. And this is 2 years after build. You go inside where they put a limecrete floor, and a limecrete floor made with NHL is not breathable, okay? Don't think it is. I mean, even the Historic England thing about floors 2012 says, if you're using NHL or cement to make your floor slab, you do not need a plastic membrane because they're not, nothing's going to come through them, yeah? So they're the membrane. So that's happening, and inside the walls are just bursting apart with salt and so on. This is the curtain wall of Lincoln Castle. It's saturated. That was pointed with NHL 3.5. 2 million quid, maybe 1.5. I might be exaggerating there. 1.5 million quid, curtain wall of the castle. Not only all this bleeding of the NHL, that wall is permanently saturated. That wall is the only dry bit of that wall, I say, is the medieval core that's exposed there, which they didn't point. All right, but this is a constant hazard in what I'm doing. I use this slide, made these points. The architect who specified the work was sat in the audience. But instead of coming and punching me in the face, he came afterwards and said, I know, what do we do? He said, now we have to, every winter, they've had to employ a bloke every day to walk the perimeter wall and pick up all the stone faces that have dropped off in the frost overnight. This is a disaster. Yeah, I mean, this is disastrous, yeah? £1.5 million quid. So anyway, yeah, those are those issues. Again, this is NHL. We've got the bricks taking the salts, not those. This is a job we did in York. This is Holy Trinity, but not the medieval porch. But as you can see from the erosion that had happened already, a heavy salt burden had been pointed with cement. So when we first pointed, we didn't use white mortars. This is all the salts, but they're being drawn into the mortars and sitting on the face. In an extreme salt contamination, those mortars might go friable quite quickly. However, now, some years on, the mortars are still there, the salts have all gone, right? So that is the job of the mason. And if, as I say, an extremist, to fail in preference to the stone, that's the job. But actually, in most cases, they won't. They'll just get that salt out, and so on. This slide has persuaded more architects than any other in the world. But sorry.
I think we should.
Yeah, I'm
because certain times they are closing the park.
Yes, no, I'm very, very nearly there. Believe me, I'm not. Just a few more, but that one. This is NHL 5, and that was how it was, and that is 2 weeks after repointing it with a hot mix. That sold more architects than any other slide, I have to be honest, because they're still NHL 5, and this one was taken after 24 hours of rain on that gable that had stopped about an hour before, right? So, yeah, and then I'll just skip through. Round earth, you do not want NHL on it. That was rendered with NHL 3.5. It's an ugly coping, but you can't say it was letting water in. And that chalk, that's round chalk earth building, just collapsed because of the building moisture in it that it can't deal with. And that's the case with all earth buildings. We cover them in NHL, that earth will reach the liquid limit one day and just slump out of the wall. So, and just a warning on gauge mixes. This is way back we did this church, 2001. And that's just when we started, my boss saying, right, we've got to use NHL. I wasn't happy, but so we did half NHL 2, so Assaye, the weakest you can get, half lime putty, 2 limestone, so again, more porosity in the aggregates, 4 sand, and this is 20 years later, where there had already, as you can see, been a heavy salt burden, but that has not behaved sacrificially. A mortar which I would have thought was pretty high in free lime, and the stone has continued to erode. So a word of caution about gauged, because again, it doesn't avoid the ongoing strength gain in the NHL component. And that building there, as a whole, is a wet building. It wasn't wet when we started. When I came back, I went through my report. It was actually dry, and it probably, in retrospect, had been pointed with a cement lime mortar. Yeah. So just very quickly, cement lime mortars, I'm not going to dwell. Where's the damage? Where's the absence of sacrificial behaviour? Again, in Calgary, cement, a little bit of cement added to a hot mix in this period. This Rudge Chapel, a limestone building in Lincoln, Nebraska, very defective detailing, which led to sacrificial behaviour in the cement lime mortars. Subsequently then they've gone in, oh, we'll point that with just sand and cement. That's why it's in distress. And because of the poor detailing, it lets the water run down these buttresses rather than shedding it off. So again, that's being done right now with cement lime mortars in Nebraska. And hey, that is the end. So